My daughter Claire looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, you're not invited to my wedding ceremony. It's meant to be intimate." Those words cut deeper than any knife. For years, I had sacrificed everything for her. Late nights working double shifts, money saved for her dreams, love given without condition. Yet here I was, reduced to a shadow, a guest too inconvenient for her perfect day. What she didn't know was that I had secretly paid for the venue, the flowers, and the photographer. And on the night before her wedding, I made a decision that would change everything. I used to think my life had settled into a gentle rhythm after my husband passed away. I was 66, a retired elementary school teacher, and my days were filled with routines that seemed small but gave me comfort. Each morning I made a cup of tea, watered the little patch of roses in front of my house, and sat by the window with a book in hand. My house was modest, paint peeling on the porch, the old heater groaning in winter, but it was mine. I had raised my children there, filling its rooms with stories, laughter, and discipline softened by love. My daughter Claire was always the bright star of the family. From the time she could string words together, I believed she was destined for more than I ever had. I worked late nights, graded papers until my hands ached, and gave up vacations so I could tuck away savings for her education. Watching her graduate, then land a good job in the city, I felt my sacrifices had been worth it. And when she introduced me to Ryan, her fiancé, I thought perhaps my prayers had been answered. He was charming, well-dressed, with the kind of confident smile that made you believe he had everything figured out. Yet in the quiet of my small home, it was loneliness that often kept me company. David, my eldest son, lived in another state with his own family, and though he called often, visits were rare. Claire, on the other hand, lived only 40 minutes away, but months could pass without her dropping by. I reminded myself she was busy. Work, social obligations, building a life of her own. I never wanted to be the kind of mother who clung to her children like chains. Still, I always answered when she called, and when she hinted she was short on money, I found a way to send a check, telling myself it was just a mother's duty. People in my neighborhood often told me I was too giving, too trusting. I would laugh it off. "That's what mothers do," I'd reply, but sometimes, late at night, I would wonder if I had done my children a disservice by never letting them see me as someone with limits. My husband used to say, "Evelyn, you give until there's nothing left. One day, someone will take advantage of that." I used to dismiss him. After all, how could love ever be taken as weakness? There were moments, however, when I felt the sting of being needed only for convenience. Claire once called me, breathless, asking if I could drive across town to help her pack for a last-minute trip. I canceled my doctor's appointment without hesitation. Another time, she asked if I could watch her friend's child for a few hours, because she and Ryan had dinner reservations. I agreed, even though my arthritis flared badly that day. Each time, she would thank me briefly and rush off, and I would tell myself it was fine. That's what family was for, wasn't it? But in the silence after those favors, a small voice whispered in me, "She doesn't call you to talk. She calls you to serve." I silenced that thought quickly, convincing myself it was ungrateful to even think it. Claire was my daughter, my flesh and blood. I loved her more than myself. I still remember one evening vividly. I had just returned from the grocery store when I overheard Claire's voice through my open iPad, which had synced to her messages. She was speaking to Ryan on speakerphone. Her laugh was airy, dismissive, and then I heard it. "Mom will never say no. She lives just to sacrifice. Honestly, sometimes I think she wouldn't know who she is if she stopped." The words froze me where I stood. My shopping bag slid from my hands, apples rolling across the floor. I wanted to believe I misheard, that it was a joke, a moment of carelessness, but the tone in her voice, it wasn't joking, it was certainty. It was truth, at least in her eyes. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. My chest ached as though something had cracked inside it. I had spent decades proving my love with acts of service, believing that one day it would be seen for what it was: devotion. Instead, to her, it had become an expectation, a default setting, something she could use without question. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped it. I pressed my palms flat against the table, trying to steady myself. For a long while, I could hear only my breathing, shallow and uneven. When she called later that night to ask if I could water her plants while she and Ryan went away for the weekend, I said yes. My voice sounded calm, but inside, something was shifting. It was as if her words had planted a seed, painful, undeniable, that would grow into something I couldn't yet see. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself, "She's my daughter. She loves me. She just doesn't know how to show it." I wanted desperately to believe it, but beneath that fragile hope, a darker truth whispered back. Or maybe she does know exactly what she's doing. I didn't realize then that those words, that tiny fracture in my heart, were only the beginning of something far larger. Looking back, I can see the line clearly, the moment where blind love began to turn into painful clarity. I never imagined that my own daughter's voice, so familiar and dear, would one day echo in my mind not as comfort, but as betrayal. And I never imagined that what started as a simple, overheard remark would unravel into a storm that would tear apart everything I thought I knew about family. I didn't know then, but I was standing at the edge of a precipice, and the fall was coming. The conversation came on a quiet Saturday afternoon, one I had thought would be ordinary. Claire had invited me to her apartment under the pretense of catching up, and I went with my usual eagerness. I brought a small basket of muffins, still warm from my oven, believing it would please her. When she opened the door, she looked radiant, her hair perfectly styled, her dress effortlessly elegant. Ryan was there too, leaning against the counter with that polished smile that never seemed to reach his eyes. We sat at the table, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel content. Then Claire's expression shifted, her voice softening in a way that immediately made me wary. "Mom," she began, her hands folded neatly on the table. "There's something I need to tell you about the wedding." My heart lifted with anticipation. Maybe she wanted my input on flowers or music. Maybe she wanted to honor me in some way. But her next words sliced through me. "We've decided to keep the ceremony very small and intimate, and we think it would be best if you didn't attend the main part. It's nothing personal. We just want it to be about us." The world tilted. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "Not attend?" I repeated, my voice trembling. Claire offered a gentle smile, the kind people use when they believe they're being reasonable. "Of course, you'll be at the reception. We've arranged a place for you to sit with some of Dad's distant cousins. It'll still be lovely, Mom. You'll see." In that instant, memories surged like a tide. I saw a little girl in pigtails clutching my hand at the county fair, whispering, "One day, Mom, you'll walk me down the aisle since Daddy might not be there." I had promised her then, no matter what, I would stand by her on that day. And now, with a calm smile, she was erasing that promise as if it had never existed. I wanted to protest, to remind her of the years I'd poured into her life, the sacrifices, the countless nights spent awake so she could have everything she dreamed of, but my lips wouldn't move. I could only sit there staring at her as Ryan poured himself a glass of wine, glancing at me with polite detachment, as though I were a guest lingering too long. The rest of the conversation blurred. I remember nodding, my hands gripping each other beneath the table so tightly my knuckles whitened. I remember Claire thanking me for being understanding, as if I had given consent to my own erasure. When I finally left her apartment, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky a bruised shade of purple. I drove home in silence, every streetlight flickering past like a dull blade. That night, I sat in my bedroom surrounded by old photographs. Claire in her prom dress, Claire with her first bicycle, Claire asleep on my chest when she was a baby. Tears came in hot waves, and I pressed a pillow against my mouth to muffle the sobs. My late husband's face stared at me from a framed picture on the dresser, his eyes kind, steady. I could almost hear his voice. "Don't ever let them forget what you've given, Evelyn. Don't let them take you for granted." The next morning, my phone buzzed. My eyes were swollen from crying, but I picked it up, hoping maybe Claire had reconsidered, that she had realized how cruel her words had been. Instead, her message read, "Mom, we're a bit short on funds. Could you help cover the catering? Just this once. It would mean so much." I sat there frozen, the absurdity of it clawing at my chest. One day, she had erased me from her wedding ceremony. The next, she was asking me to pay for the meal that strangers would eat while I sat hidden at the edge of the celebration. I felt not like a mother, but like an ATM with aging hands. I typed back a quick, automatic response. "I'll see what I can do." The words felt foreign, like they belonged to a version of me that was vanishing. Inside, something twisted. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was insult. It was the realization that my love had been turned into currency, and even then, it wasn't enough to buy me a place beside my own daughter on the most important day of her life. I set the phone down, staring at it as though it were a snake. For a long while, I simply sat there, listening to the creak of the house settling around me. I thought of the muffins cooling on her counter yesterday, the way her smile had seemed rehearsed, the way Ryan's eyes had flicked over me like I was a relic taking up space. I pressed my palms against my face, whispering into the silence, "Why, Claire? Why am I good enough to pay but not good enough to stand beside you?" The question echoed inside me, but no answer came. What I didn't know then was that the betrayal I had just endured was only the surface. Beneath it lay truths I had not yet uncovered. Truths that would shatter what little hope I still clung to. I had intended to quietly help, to swallow my pain and send her the money anyway. But something stopped me. A shadow of suspicion, a feeling that this was not the full story, and I was right. I had told myself I would help with the catering, that I would not let bitterness blind me to Claire's needs. But when I sat down at my desk to go over my checkbook, something compelled me to open the drawer where I kept my household files. It had been years since I truly organized them, but as I sifted through, envelopes and receipts began to reveal a story I had not wanted to see. The first envelope held the invoice for the venue. My name was printed clearly at the top, the credit card statement attached, showing the charge had been cleared months ago. I remembered when Claire had asked if I could temporarily front the money until Ryan's bonus came through. She had promised to pay me back within the week. That week had stretched into months, and I had quietly assumed she must have repaid me in some other form. But the numbers told the truth. She never had. With shaking hands, I opened another folder. There it was again, this time for the flowers. The florist had even written a thank you note addressed to me for being such a generous client. I remembered Claire brushing it aside, saying she would take care of it later. She never did. And then, the photographs. The receipt from the photographer was in the same pile, my signature on the contract, my account debited for the deposit. It was undeniable. I had funded nearly every piece of this wedding, and yet my presence had been deemed unworthy. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. My breath came shallow as I stared at the evidence of my own erasure. Every slip of paper was a reminder that my sacrifices had been rewritten in Claire's narrative, erased, or worse, claimed as her own. I sat back in my chair, clutching the papers to my chest as though holding them could steady me. Memories cascaded through my mind. Claire's first piano lessons, which I worked double shifts to afford. The dress she wore to her high school dance, which I stitched by hand when money was tight. The rent I secretly paid for her apartment when she was struggling in college. I had always told myself those sacrifices were a mother's joy. But looking at these bills, knowing she was banishing me from the very day I had built with my own hands, the joy felt poisoned. I pushed the papers aside, my body trembling with something I could not yet name, part grief, part rage. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but when I looked, I saw it was my iPad lighting up across the room. Claire's messages had synced to it. I picked it up, my heart pounding, and saw a thread of conversation open with one of her friends. The words burned into me like acid. Mom is such a hassle. As long as she keeps paying, I don't care. Honestly, she lives to sacrifice. Might as well use it while I can. I dropped the device onto the couch as though it had scalded me. My body shook uncontrollably and tears blurred my vision. It wasn't just thoughtless now, it was deliberate. She knew what she was doing. I wasn't a mother to her anymore. I was a resource, a wallet with a name. I curled into myself, whispering her words over and over as if repetition could make them less real. As long as she keeps paying. That was all I was. Not Evelyn, not Mom, just a line in her budget. When David called later that evening, I tried to compose myself, but he heard the crack in my voice immediately. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked gently. The moment I heard his voice, the dam broke. I told him everything, the invoices, the exclusion from the ceremony, the cruel message. For a while, he was silent, and I feared he was judging me for being weak, for letting it all happen. But then I heard him sigh heavily. "Mom, don't let them trample you anymore. You've done enough. More than enough. If Claire and Ryan can't see your worth, then you need to show them, not with more sacrifice, but with boundaries." His words wrapped around me like a blanket. He didn't shout, didn't rage on my behalf. He simply gave me the validation I had been starved of, that I was not crazy, not oversensitive, that what Claire had done was cruel. I sat long into the night, staring at the scattered papers, the glowing screen of the iPad still showing Claire's mocking words. Something inside me solidified. For years, I had bent myself to the shape of their needs, convincing myself that was love. But love without respect is just exploitation. That night, for the first time, I began to think not of what more I could give, but of what I could take back. I pulled out a sheet of stationery, my hand trembling as I smoothed it flat. The pen hovered over the page for a long while before the words finally spilled out. I didn't know exactly what the letter would contain, but I knew one thing. It would change everything. And once it was written, there would be no going back. The letter I began that night remained unfinished on my desk for days. I kept rereading the words, rewriting sentences, doubting myself at every turn. Was I truly ready to confront Claire? Was I truly ready to let her see me not as the compliant mother she had always known, but as someone who had limits? The thought terrified me, but a deeper fear pressed harder. The fear of vanishing into silence, of allowing my life sacrifices to be rewritten as someone else's triumph. The confirmation came when I overheard a phone call, not meant for my ears. Claire had stopped by to pick up some boxes she'd left in my garage. While she carried them out, her phone rang, and she stepped onto the porch, assuming I couldn't hear. But the window was open and her words drifted inside, clear as day. "Yes, Ryan," she laughed lightly. "The wedding is going to be beautiful. Everyone will think we pulled it off ourselves. We've told your parents already. Yes, they think we paid for everything. It's good, you know. Makes us look capable, independent." My hand tightened around the teacup until it rattled in its saucer. The words hit me harder than any blow, so that was it. They hadn't merely taken my money and erased my place in the ceremony. They had used my sacrifices as their own badge of honor, flaunting it as proof of their independence. When Claire came back in, smiling as if nothing had happened, I forced a polite nod. My mind, however, was spiraling. Ryan knew. He knew and said nothing, because it served him. To them, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was strategy. Cold, deliberate strategy. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers once more. The invoices, the receipts, all evidence of a narrative they had stolen from me. My chest felt tight, as if a weight pressed down with every breath. For so long I had told myself Claire's actions were careless, thoughtless, even selfish, but now I saw it clearly. This was no accident. This was calculated. I whispered into the silence of my house, "If I say nothing, everything I gave will become theirs. My sacrifices will wear their names." The thought was unbearable. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I gathered every contract, every receipt, laying them out across the table like puzzle pieces. With shaking fingers, I dialed the venue first. "This is Evelyn Harris," I said, voice trembling but steady enough. "Yes, the bride's mother. The contract is under my name. I need to make changes." The woman on the line hesitated but confirmed. The contract was indeed mine. Canceling it was within my rights. I thanked her, my voice breaking as I hung up. One by one, I repeated the process with the florist and the photographer. Each time, the same confirmation. My name, my payment, my control. By the time I ended the last call, dawn was breaking. My body was drained, but my spirit felt sharper, as if clarity had finally cut through the fog of years. For the first time, I felt not powerless but capable. I pulled out the unfinished letter from my desk and laid it on the table. Slowly, deliberately, I began to write. My hand no longer trembled. Each word came like a blade, slicing through years of silence. "Claire, if you choose to treat me as a stranger, then you will learn what it feels like to lose everything I've given you. I will not allow my sacrifices to be erased or rewritten as your own. You wanted me absent from your wedding, then my gifts will be absent too. When the day comes, you will know the weight of what you cast aside." I folded the letter carefully, sliding it into an envelope. I made arrangements with the venue manager. Deliver this to Claire on the morning of the wedding. It would be my voice when I chose not to stand there myself. The house was silent as I set the envelope aside, but inside me, a storm raged. I loved my daughter, but love cannot survive without respect, and respect, I realized, had been buried long ago under layers of entitlement and greed. As night fell again, I stared out the window at the darkened street, feeling the enormity of what I had done. The contracts were canceled. The letter was ready. There was no turning back. I pressed my hand against the glass, whispering, "Forgive me, but I cannot let this continue." And somewhere deep inside, beneath the sorrow and exhaustion, a strange calm took root. The calm of a woman who had finally drawn her line. The day of reckoning was coming. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and crisp, a cruel contrast to the storm that was about to unfold. I sat in my kitchen, sipping tea, the envelope already delivered hours earlier as I had arranged. My house was quiet, but I could imagine the scene unraveling at the venue. For once, I didn't rush to rescue anyone. I simply waited, calm in the knowledge that the truth was finally stepping into the light. At the venue, guests began to arrive in elegant attire, chatter filling the air. But the smiles faltered as they approached the doors. There were no flowers decorating the arch, no tables set, no photographer bustling about with lenses and flashes. The building was locked, the interior dark. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Murmurs rose. "Are we at the wrong place?" What happened? Claire arrived with Ryan, her face glowing until she realized what awaited her. Panic spread across her features as she ran to the doors, tugging on handles that wouldn't budge. She grabbed her phone, furiously dialing the venue manager. I imagined her voice shrill, demanding answers until the words hit her like a slap. The contract holder, Mrs. Evelyn Harris, canceled the booking last night. I could almost see the shock draining the color from her face. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone, guests now staring openly. Ryan muttered something under his breath, his jaw tight. But even his charm could not conjure a solution from thin air. Then came the final blow. A staff member stepped forward, holding an envelope. "This is for you, Miss Claire. Mrs. Harris asked me to deliver it." All eyes fixed on her as she tore the seal. The paper trembled in her hands. I had chosen my words carefully. "Claire, I gave you everything, believing that love meant sacrifice. But when you asked me to erase myself from your life's most important day, I realized you had already erased me long before. This wedding was built on my hands, my savings, my devotion, Yet you told the world you did it alone. If you want me absent, then you will see how your day looks without me. Let the truth be your companion as you begin this life you claim to build on your own." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then came the whispers, the shocked gasps. Guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another, at Claire, at Ryan. The weight of judgment was immediate and merciless. Claire's face crumpled. She screamed, "How could she do this to me? She ruined everything." Her voice cracked, not with sorrow, but with fury. Yet when she looked up expecting sympathy, she was met with cold stares. Someone in the crowd muttered, loud enough to carry, "She paid for it all, and you lied?" Another voice followed, "If she treats her own mother this way, what will she do to others?" Ryan stood rigid, his face flushed. He tried to defend them, stammering about misunderstandings, but the letter was undeniable. His parents looked horrified, their eyes darting between him and Claire with growing distrust. Claire dropped to her knees, clutching the letter as if squeezing it might erase its words. Her makeup streaked, her voice ragged. "She betrayed me. She betrayed me." But it wasn't betrayal. It was truth, raw and unfiltered. And truth has a way of cutting deeper than any blade. I pictured her there, surrounded by the fragments of her illusions, while the world saw her clearly for the first time. My chest was heavy with sorrow, but beneath it was something stronger: release. As I set down my empty teacup, I whispered to the stillness of my home, "No, Claire, I didn't betray you. You betrayed me long before today." And in that quiet moment, I rose from my chair, steady on my feet, ready to step into a new life unchained from her ungratefulness. Claire had fallen, and I walked away whole. The fallout from the wedding disaster rippled through every corner of the family. The celebration that was supposed to unite two households had crumbled into whispers, accusations, and shame. Within weeks, Claire and Ryan's engagement was hanging by a thread. Rumors spread quickly, how the bride had banished her own mother, how the truth had unraveled in front of everyone, how the illusion of independence had been shattered with a single letter. Ryan's parents, once so warm toward Claire, grew cold. They began questioning whether their son could truly build a stable future with a woman who had deceived even her own mother. Arguments erupted between Claire and Ryan, each blaming the other for how far the lies had gone. By the end of that month, the wedding was officially canceled. The engagement quietly dissolved. What remained was a hollow silence in Claire's once perfect world. Meanwhile, my own life began to shift. David, my son, started visiting more often. He would drop by unannounced, bringing groceries or a warm meal, sitting across the table with a patient ear. He didn't always say much, but his presence alone was enough to remind me I wasn't alone. One evening, as we shared dinner, he reached across the table and held my hand. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm proud of you. You finally stood up for yourself." His words filled me with a quiet strength I had long forgotten I had. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. A few relatives muttered that I had been too harsh, too ruthless to ruin my own daughter's wedding day. They called it cruel, unforgivable. But others, many more, looked at me with a new kind of respect. Neighbors, friends, even distant cousins wrote me letters or called to say they understood, that they had endured similar wounds in silence and wished they had found the courage to act. For every whisper of judgment, there were voices that reminded me what I had done was not vengeance, it was justice. I realized then that setting boundaries wasn't cruelty. It was survival. For years, I had poured myself out until there was almost nothing left, and in return, I had been reduced to a wallet with a heartbeat. But in drawing the line, in saying enough, I had reclaimed something far greater than money or recognition. I had reclaimed myself. And then one afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Claire stood there. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. She looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of her choices had hollowed her out. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the silence heavy. Then she whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." The words should have soothed me, but instead they felt like a fragile bandage over a wound that had cut too deep. I stepped aside, letting her in. She sat at the table where so many of our past conversations had taken place, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I was wrong," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I took you for granted. I lied. I hurt you in ways I can't take back. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to tell you I regret it." I looked at her, truly looked at her, the daughter I had carried, nurtured, sacrificed for. My heart ached with love and pain intertwined. "Claire," I said softly, "I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. I can't forget, and I won't go back to being the mother who gives until there's nothing left. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be built on respect, not expectation." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, though I knew it would take time, perhaps years, for those words to truly sink in. Still, for the first time, I felt the balance shift. I was no longer a silent servant in her life. I was her mother, yes, but also a woman who had drawn her line in the sand. In the months that followed, I began to live differently. I joined a book club at the local library where laughter and stories filled my evenings. I traveled with friends to places I'd always dreamed of visiting but never dared to prioritize. I even met new people who saw me not as someone to lean on endlessly, but as a person with her own stories, her own worth. I realized something profound. Love is priceless, but it should never be taken for granted. A mother's devotion is a gift, not a debt. To reduce it to money or obligation is to strip it of its beauty. As I sit here now, penning these words, I think of you, the listener, the witness to my story. If you were in my place, would you have remained silent, swallowed the humiliation, and paid for the very day you were barred from? Or would you, like me, have chosen to act, to remind those who had forgotten that love without respect is not love at all? For me, the answer is clear, and I can only hope that my story reminds others. A mother's love is boundless, but it is not to be used as currency or a ticket to pride. It is to be honored, cherished, and never, ever denied.